Hi, everyone. You've probably all heard of the saying, "Sink or swim." So in this talk today, we're gonna discuss the importance of training and why it matters to an SRE practice, or really, any initiative that is essentially an organizational culture transformation. You definitely want to set your people up to swim and not to sink. So Dirk gave you the sort of TLDR on me, but I just thought I'd start by introducing myself a little bit more, give us some fodder for the hallway track today. So hello, my name is Jennifer Petoff, aka Dr. J. My nickname is Dr. J because I started my career with a PhD in synthetic chemistry, and I've sort of come a long way from there. And as Dirk said, I'm currently leading the Google Cloud Platform and Technical Infrastructure Education team at Google. We're a training team that focuses on scalable learning programs for an organization that spans thousands of engineers. So SRE EDU and perpetuating the site reliability engineering culture at Google, it's a key part of my remit. And I am probably most well known outside of Google as one of the editors of the SRE book that we published in 2016. Again, coolest project I've ever worked on at Google, represents the contributions from over 70 contributors, collectively with over 500 years of Google production experience. In my spare time, fun fact, I am also a part-time travel blogger at Sidewalk Safari, and I love to travel, so I'm very excited to be here in Winter Tour today with you all. All right, so with that introduction out of the way, let's talk training and why training is important. So as I mentioned, my job is to deliver learning programs to the engineers at Google, and I think folks in this room will agree that when it comes to running systems in production, it's complicated. There's a lot to learn. Even just ramping up on a new service, there's a lot to learn. There's the ins and outs of the production systems you'll be managing, incident management best practices, and more. And some people think that training is really about cramming as much information into people's heads as possible, setting up this proverbial fire hose of information. Let's spray people with as much information as possible. But the reality is that no matter how much you tell people, they're only going to retain a very small amount, especially if you're lecturing at them, if you're doing this sort of sage on the stage approach. So the reality is that training is not about the fire hose of information. It's actually about believing in yourself. It's about building confidence, and it's about fighting imposter syndrome. And this is especially true for people who are new to a team. And I'm just going to share a quick quote here. So this is a quote that's pulled from the annual State of DevOps report, which, as many of you may know, it's an annual survey that's based on survey responses from thousands of practitioners around the world. And the State of DevOps report looks at the relationship between software delivery performance and organizational performance across dimensions like profitability, market share, and productivity. And I think our natural tendency as organizations is to focus on improving technology, improving processes, improving our sort of technical capabilities. But the reality is that improving all the technology, processes, and capabilities won't help you succeed without a healthy organizational culture. And it turns out that according to the State of DevOps report, teams with generative cultures have 30% higher organizational performance. So why am I telling you this? How does this all relate to site reliability engineering, which is my jam? So quick detour into generative culture. So what is generative culture? So this is a type of organizational culture that's high trust. It emphasizes information flow. And you'll also notice that failure leads to inquiry, which at its core is a foundational DevOps and SRE tenet, is a key element of is a key element of a generative culture. And as we saw, that was a critical theme with our Apollo 13 theme for the conference today as well. So going back to the subject of training, it turns out that going beyond confidence, training is really about driving or perpetuating a desired organizational culture. So just like with these hot air balloons, training can give your organizational culture a lift and contribute to positive organizational performance. That said, of course, you need to find a way to make sure nothing or no one holds you down. This is a photo of a blimp ride that I took this weekend. Yeah, just as a quick aside, since this is the first talk of the day, I want to hopefully keep a little fun element in here as well. Did you know that the Zeppelin was actually invented very close to here in Friedrichshafen on the Bodensee over in Germany? So this is where I spent my weekend. Neat. And I can tell you that just like learning programs, if you think about the time and money cost, this trip was expensive, but well worth the investment. Okay, but let's get back to the main point of the talk, as opposed to my gratuitous travel photos. So this talk is all about why learning programs are important to a successful SRE or DevOps practice. And again, the State of DevOps report research shows that changing the way people work changes culture. And this is echoed in the work of John Shook, who spoke of his experience in transforming culture. So the way to change culture is not to first change how people think, but instead to start by changing how people behave, what it is that they actually do. Or stated another way, it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than think your way into a new way of acting. And I like to think of it as confidence drives behavior, and behavior repeated over time is what drives your culture. Taking a step further, learning is essentially your confidence engine, which in turn shifts your culture into high gear. I'm going to share a quick case study here to illustrate this point. Well, let's talk about how we measure how effectively we move the needle on confidence with Google's SRE EDU orientation program. And I do happen to have one colleague who's here with me today who's been through the program. I won't shine a light on him over here, but he can attest to whether what I'm telling you is true or not after the fact, if you want to fact check it. But again, I assert that learning and well-crafted learning programs can be a positive driver of organizational culture and high-performing teams. So how is that? So in summary, we benchmark culture through confidence in a 4-step process. So again, we define our survey questions, we ground the rating scale, we measure the results over time, and then we analyze and compare across related programs. So we've defined a few reliability culture questions that are included in our SRE EDU orientation surveys, as well as Google's general developer onboarding surveys. And these are, please rate your ability to do the below tasks, explain the benefits of a blameless postmortem culture, measure my services alignment with business goals, so kind of getting at the SLOs and error budgets pieces of things, and then using monitoring and alerting to make rational decisions about my service. Now, it's important to use a grounded scale when you do this, because if you use a general 5-point scale without grounding, you're basically introducing variability. Without grounding, one person's 3 could be another person's 5, and you're really hard to draw a meaningful comparison. So we use this rating scale to benchmark the questions that I shared with you on the previous slide. So again, please rate your ability to do the following tasks. I have no idea where to start. I could do it with someone's help. I could read docs and figure it out myself. I could do it mostly from memory. I could teach others mostly from memory. And you can see here, we're going from totally low confidence to super high confidence, because you're never more confident than when you can teach something to someone else. And so to figure out how well a program is moving the needle on confidence, we need to look at survey data measured over time. And for our programs, we ask the confidence questions 4 times in a 6-month period. So we do it before orientation, after orientation, 30 days after orientation, and 6 months after orientation. And in addition to looking at these trends for SRE EDU orientation over time, we also look at comparisons between SRE EDU orientation, where the learning objectives are specifically focused on reliability principles, best practices, and we compare that to general developer onboarding, which has a more generalist curriculum that doesn't explicitly address reliability in the same way. And I'm going to show you the output of this exercise in the next few slides and how we demonstrate that SRE EDU orientation moves the needle on confidence. So don't forget, the assertion here is learning drives confidence, confidence drives behavior, and behavior repeated over time is what drives the culture. So this slide assesses in aggregate the confidence of our learners in their ability to explain the benefits of a blameless postmortem culture at different points during their ramp up. So the blue line represents those who took general developer onboarding. The red line represents those who took SRE EDU orientation. And you may be wondering, what's NLS? Myself and others at Google, we love a TLA or a 3-letter acronym. In this case, NLS is what we've been calling a net learning score, or in some ways, this is a view of the broad level of confidence of our cohorts at different points in time. So NLS is defined like a net promoter score. So we take the top 2 buckets in our survey. I could do it mostly from memory. I could teach others mostly from memory. We subtract the 2 bottom buckets. I have no idea where to start. I could do it with someone's help. And then we divide by the total number of responses. So the scale hypothetically runs from +1 to -1, with +1 representing maximum confidence. And as you can see, the confidence of SRE EDU orientation participants grows over time. And SRE EDU participants are more confident about this topic at each survey point than their counterparts who took general developer onboarding. And this is important to show that with a specific focus on reliability principles and best practices, we're driving confidence. And in the long run, we believe we're perpetuating Google's site reliability engineering culture. Now, it turns out this effect is even more pronounced when we assess confidence on measuring my service's alignment with business objectives. So once again, we're seeing the confidence grow over time, with a bump particularly pronounced between pre and post-training surveys. So those who complete SRE EDU orientation, they're more confident on the topics of service level objectives and error budgets than those who completed general developer onboarding. Before orientation, confidence was essentially equivalent and low, and then quickly diverged, with SRE EDU attendees gaining more confidence more quickly. Again, expected. This is totally expected and working as intended, since we're putting explicit focus on the subject, whereas general developer onboarding does not. We see a similar trend in using monitoring and alerting to make rational decisions about my service. So those who complete SRE EDU orientation are more confident on the subject of monitoring than those who completed general developer onboarding. Once again, before our orientation, confidence was basically low and equivalent, and diverged with SRE EDU participants gaining more confidence more quickly. Now, the observant among you may have noticed dips in the confidence graph between orientation and 1 month post-orientation. And we hypothesize that this is a correction for overconfidence. So I thought I understood this, but apparently I have more to learn. As you can imagine, there's a lot of nuance in these concepts, and they take time to fully understand. But between 1 month and 6 months, we see confidence increases again and surpasses post-orientation levels for SRE EDU orientation participants, while general developer onboarding participants rate their confidence still net negative even after 6 months. Cool. So after I have a sip of water, I am going to talk to you a bit about how to build your own confidence-boosting learning program. Hopefully I've piqued your interest by drawing this connection between learning and confidence and culture. Let's deep dive on some key considerations if you plan to spin up your own training program. And while I'll talk about this in the context of an SRE or a DevOps practice, I think the general principles and considerations can be applied to any organizational transformation that people may either be excited about or have mixed feelings about. So in light of all this, how should you go about training your SREs or your DevOps practitioners? There's really no one-size-fits-all approach to this, but rather training methods that lie along a continuum from low to high efforts. At the low end of the spectrum, or should I say the no end of the spectrum, you've got sink or swim, which basically means you let people just figure things out on their own with no guidance or support. Self-study means you're pointing people at relevant resources, but it's up to them to consume those resources on their own, however they want and whenever they want. Pairing people up via the buddy system is another option. or providing new members of the team with a mentor who can answer questions or who they can work with to shadow and reverse shadow different operations. Ad hoc classes or whiteboard sessions require more effort. And at the highest end of the effort spectrum, we have the systematic training program. And this is a program, a training program that has well thought out learning objectives, content to support those objectives, and a curriculum that's taught on a regular basis, consistently and reliably. So a couple tips right off the bat: avoid sink or swim if you value inclusivity. So sink or swim, just letting people fend for themselves, it can breed stress, frustration, and even attrition. It can also contribute to imposter syndrome. And for other methods beyond just basically avoiding sink or swim, you want to consider the return on investment of the effort that you're investing in your learning program. So some of the advantages of the higher effort or higher touch options are organizational. So these higher touch options, which culminate in your full-fledged training program, can demonstrate things like leadership commitment to the development of their employees. It can ensure also that everyone's speaking with one voice and you get this sort of consistency built in. So for example, if you rely on the buddy system, the results you get may vary depending on who the buddy is, and each person gets a different story. If there's one thing I've learned about SREs in my time at Google, it's that they can be quite opinionated and may share those opinions very liberally with the folks that they're mentoring. The higher touch approach can also, as we've talked about, help imbibe the desired organizational culture and reinforce the desired behaviors. All right, so the first question that probably comes to your mind, and this is the first question that comes to everyone's mind when they think about building a training program, it's what should I teach? And what to include in your training really boils down to these three dimensions. So you've got maturity, which is the maturity of your organization in adopting key principles, practices, and culture. So are you early on in your DevOps or SRE journey, or are you old pros with a well-established culture and practice? If you zoom in on individuals, how familiar are they with your organization and with your infrastructure? And then finally, looking at experience, that's the third dimension. So in particular, have people in the organization, have they worked in an SRE organization at another company? Have they practiced DevOps elsewhere before joining your particular organization? Let's start by considering the case of those who are just starting out on their DevOps or SRE journey. So how do we ensure that we're minimizing the potential, the pain on the potential long and bumpy road ahead? So this is the low organizational maturity use case. So you're just getting started in adapting, adopting SRE principles and practices. So step one would be to start by addressing any skill gaps that you see. Ask yourself some foundational questions about your team. Does your team use a defect tracking system? Does your team have a project planning model? Is work done in a version control system? Are solutions clearly articulated and vetted by team members? Do you have design docs to back those up before starting implementation? Does your team have a shared repository of commonly used tools and libraries? Now, if the answer to most of these questions is no, start here and address these gaps with training before moving on. Now on to step two. So it's a good idea to consider who you have on your team and how to tailor the message accordingly, because the reaction of individual team members to proposed organizational transformation, we're gonna start doing SRE, we're gonna start applying DevOps practices. It's going to depend on how familiar they are with your organization, crossed by their level of experience with SRE. So, for example, have they practiced SRE or DevOps elsewhere? So now, people who've just joined your organization and who have low or no experience with DevOps or SRE, they're likely to just roll with it and be receptive to the change. Go with the flow. The people you really need to watch out for are those who've been in your organization for a while, but don't have personal experience with DevOps or SRE. So these folks could be resistant to the proposed change. And if so, it's important to address, what's in it for me? Why is it different this time? If the work that your organization is doing and trying to transform is just seen as the new hotness that's going to quickly fade. So for people who have existing SRE or DevOps experience, so these are your catalysts. You want to empower these members of the team to tell their success stories. A lot of learning programs, especially higher touch learning programs, are about storytelling and passing on these, again, success stories from one engineer to the next. So once again, tailor the format, tailor the content of your proposed training to address these unique needs. So now what about organizations that already have a well-established SRE team or practice? So now it's really all about building the confidence and reinforcing the culture that you've already built. So now we'll talk about what you want to put into a training program for this particular use case. So this is the high organizational maturity use case. You've already got a well-established culture. You've already got a well-established practice. So now, once again, we need to dig in and evaluate the mix of people on the team. Once again, we're going to do this in a lovely 2x2 matrix along dimensions of organizational familiarity and SRE experience. Let's take a look at that. So first, you've got your newbies. So these are people who are just joining the company and who are also less familiar with SRE or DevOps practices. Internal transfers. So these are folks who are expected to have high familiarity with your company, but low experience with SRE or DevOps. Old timers. So these are the folks who worked at your company for a while and they know the company, they know the culture. And then industry veterans. So here are the people who are highly experienced with SRE or DevOps practices, but they're new to your company. Now, of course, let's take a look at the learning needs for each of these audiences. So once you've assessed this mix of people on the team, you want to figure out where to focus your training content. Newbies, so these are the folks who need the most attention. They need to learn your infrastructure. They need to learn your organizational culture at the same time. Internal transfers, these folks may know your systems, but they're less familiar with DevOps or SRE, so focus here. Old timers, these are the people who have experience on both of the dimensions. So a good idea here is to go for technical depth to help unlock further career growth. And in addition, take advantage of their experience and help them to tell their stories by enlisting them to teach. I didn't mention this when we talked about the SRE EDU orientation case study, but again, my team is a very small central core team, and we scale through volunteer subject matter experts. You can't hire all the expertise onto the team and have a team of thousands of people. So we scale with our experienced folks. And finally, industry veterans. So these folks need to ramp up on your infrastructure. They need to ramp up on your processes. Maybe they need to unlearn some bad habits from elsewhere. So focus on the specifics of your organizational and culture, organization and culture. Okay, so until now, we've focused in on evaluating the organization and thinking about what you might want to include in a training program. However, there's a whole other side we've yet to consider. And in sort of learning and development circles, this is an often overlooked element. So I like to draw an analogy between the software development lifecycle and building and running a training program. In both cases, we need to consider both the what and the all-important how. So in software development, your what is your shiny product features, and the how is deploying to production in a reliable way to meet the needs of our users. In the training program context, the what is our shiny training content, our shiny curriculum, and the how is deploying a consistent and reliable training program that meets the needs of our learners. So now let's talk about the all-important how of delivering a training program. So this is really about operations, and there's two dimensions that you'll want to consider in this case. So it's the size and the growth rate. So how big is your organization and how fast are you growing? And these operational dimensions really inform how much effort in it makes sense to invest in training. So if your organization is small and growing slowly, focusing on one-to-one knowledge transfer through mentoring or shadowing is sort of a good approach there. If your organization is large and growing slowly, invest in ongoing education as a retention and career development tool, like keep learning, keep developing. If your organization is small but growing rapidly, invest in onboarding, get all those newbies up to speed. And then if you're both large and growing rapidly, it makes sense to invest in a full lifecycle training program. And the Google SRE team falls into this upper right quadrant. And that's why we've invested in a full-time team to develop this from onboarding all the way through continuing education as part of our broader program. So to summarize, just invest the most under conditions of rapid growth. Small but rapidly growing organizations benefit the most from onboarding. And don't forget about your existing people and invest. You want to invest in ongoing education for their career developments. Okay, so that's the what and the how. Now let's talk about the where, as in where to begin. So I have two words for you, or rather one acronym here. So the two words are ASK plus BAT. The acronym is ASBAT, where ASBAT stands for a student should be able to. This is a good way to think about framing learning objectives for programs that you might be trying to run. Let's talk about possible ASBATs for a training program. And your first thought might be something like, my student should be able to understand the foo service. But the reality is this is written in a really passive and hard to understand way, or hard to observe way. Instead, really focus on the behaviors that you want to drive, or like where you're trying to build the confidence, like we talked about before. The goal here is to observe and measure how the training is applied. So think about it like this, and things like a student should be able to use a certain tool to identify how much memory a job is using, interpret a graph in the monitoring tool to identify the health of the foo service, or a student should be able to move traffic away from a cluster using a particular drain tool in 5 minutes, for example. So make these action-oriented and observable. And there's a simple model you can use to aid in the development of your content. Instructional designers call this the ADDIE model, where ADDIE stands for analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. Where so you're going to start by analyzing the needs of your folks. You're going to design your program based on your ASBATs. You're going to develop the content, implement the program, roll it out, and then evaluate the effectiveness. And it's good to keep a very tight and iterative feedback loop to help drive continuous improvements. Let's get meta for a minute. This talk is about training site reliability engineers, and sort of the aha moment for me when I took this job was the foundational principles of SRE can be applied to the training program itself. So let's see how. So I want to start by revisiting the service reliability hierarchy that was originally formulated by Mikey Dickerson, former Google SRE. And the service reliability hierarchy was included in the original SRE book. The hierarchy covers the elements that go into making a service reliable, from the most foundational to the most advanced. And it turns out that the elements of the service reliability hierarchy can be adapted to the training context. So if the way I look at it is we do monitoring in the form of attendance tracking and survey feedback. We address issues that surface via that monitoring. We occasionally write postmortems when things go wrong so that we can learn from failure. We do a lot of testing of new content and programs. Think about canarying and a progressive rollout, for example. And all the while, we're scaling our operations by looking for opportunities to vanquish toil through automation so that we can make the most of our limited human resources. And it's only when we do all these things that our program can be fully actualized and we can realize the full potential of the curriculum design and program itself. All right. So here's another page that we take from our SRE playbook. So is more effort always better? I would argue, no, it's not. So just like SRE, we're striving for a balance between competing concerns. In this case, we're balancing effort versus results, whereas in a traditional SRE use case, it's velocity versus stability. And if we think about a certain SRE principle in practice, we basically want to do just enough to meet the needs of our learners. We want to keep them happy, but not too happy. And we want to consider the trade-offs. And I like to tell members of my team, like, let's not polish the diamond. Like, let's not make perfect the enemy of good enough. The example I'll give here, like when we launched our flagship SRE EDU orientation program, my team, like, it was getting really good ratings. People liked it. I don't know if my colleague over here will assert to that. But we were getting very good ratings. People were building confidence. But my team kept wanting to, like, let's tweak it a little. Let's do this. Let's add on to that. And I soon realized, like, we're polishing the diamond, and we could be investing in ongoing education, on-call training, other things. So it's really important to consider the trade-offs here to make sure you're getting the most from your efforts. So now let me give a quick example of how we use monitoring to drive improvements to the SRE EDU onboarding program. So let's go back to the base of the pyramid. We launched our sort of V1 of the program, and what did our monitoring tell us 6 to 12 months after we did that? So you can see here there's a key theme emerging. SREs really wanted a more hands-on education program. They didn't want a lecture series. We were basically spraying people with the fire hose of information when we started out. And we could see here that there was really a strong request for learning by doing. So what did we do? We took that feedback, we iterated, and we came up with a new program design that addressed these concerns. And V2 of orientation, it moved away from passive listening. It moved away from lectures. We gave people just enough to be able to troubleshoot a real system that we had designed for this purpose. We also very carefully coached our facilitators to back off more and more, while as the program progressed, so that people could sort of stand on their own and develop their confidence. We would have people work in groups of 3, with the least experienced person in the middle driving those hands-on experiences. And again, the goal was not to spray people with a fire hose of information, but very explicitly to instill confidence. And what does our monitoring tell us now? So our students are clearly happier with the hands-on exercises. There's, for example, the breakage scenarios in SRE EDU were awesome. Delving into real breaking scenarios was super valuable. I would love more. Thoroughly enjoyed the breakages. It was the funnest week I've had this year. Overall, it made me feel more connected to production and technology, which made me really happy. And I was excited about that because that one was basically like our VP of SRE at the time, who was kind of like a secret shopper in the program. And so to get his reaction was very, very cool. Undercover boss. I don't know if that's here in Switzerland. Cool. All right. And it turns out that version 2 is also better equipped with observability, for better observability. So instead of asking students what they thought about the training, we can observe concrete job-related behaviors. So things like using a systems diagram, diagnosing issues using SRE tools, annotating an outage, mitigating a realistic production issue, and finding root causes and proposing solutions. There you have it. That's a key example of how we SRE'd our training program. We applied SRE principles to the training program itself. All right, let me leave you with a few key takeaways. So training is an investment. It's an investment in your organization and in your people. You ideally want to evaluate the cost and the benefits. You want to make sure you're making the right level of investment based on your organizational circumstances. And again, where to invest. This depends on the what and the how of your organizational circumstances. And walk the talk. So apply SRE or DevOps principles to the training program itself for a consistent and reliable experience. And remember, confidence is what revs your culture engine. I'll leave you with a link to resources to learn more, including a full text of all 3 Google SRE books, as well as a number of shorter form publications, including one that basically in written form covers what I've discussed today. So the Training SREs report. I do have a few copies here with me. If anybody feels like an old school paper copy, I'm happy to hand those out. But again, check out the resources on sre.google/resources. And of course, I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to the State of DevOps report. You can find and download the full report here. And yep, also very useful, also at dora.dev/report. And there's one of my colleagues in Google Developer Relations runs the Dora community. And with graphics like this, how can it not be fun? I recommend checking out dora.community for more information and to learn from this community of practice. And where am I? Finally, I think we do have 8 minutes and 40 seconds for questions. But if you'd like to learn more in the meantime, or if we run out of time, I'd certainly be happy to connect on LinkedIn. Looking forward to being in touch with many of you and chatting throughout the conference. So thank you very much, and we'll take questions from here. Yay.